I think contrast makes things more visible, right? And that's probably what happened in Argentina. And I think that there are plenty of people in Germany who very much see how things are going wrong, and that contrast maybe, who knows, sets Germany up to be a better candidate to go in a libertarian direction in the midterm to long term than other countries.
I mean, nobody yet has not done it with headphones on. And I wouldn't say I would insist it, because some people find it a bit, but it creates an intimacy that's unparalleled, really.
The difference is that you're doing it and you have control over the setup, right? And I'm doing it in a remote, so they have their setup at home or wherever they happen to be.
And how long have you been running yours?
We're now in 2 years, so yeah.
Oh,
We only do it once a month though. So, yeah.
And you said that you went from video back to audio. That's interesting. We're going the other way at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you can do it, it's obviously preferable. But it's a question of effort versus payoff. And for me, the extra effort it's more effort for me if I can have. I would prefer to scale up the podcast in terms of frequency rather than have everything land on my lap in terms of production time.
I must admit, when I started, because I come from a filmmaking background, the fact that I could put a little one of those and a couple of mics and a couple of stands into a bag and go and make content was the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. And I loved the first few years of just doing sound. But the truth is, if you want to scale, and we've scaled well because we've captured our market, but it's not a very big market. And I think it's word of mouth often, coming to these events, people know who know people. But on YouTube, you get discovered. You do just get discovered. And unfortunately, people like to watch other people talking, even if it's just talking. I do it myself. I never would have predicted that was something that would happen, that I would sit and watch Joe Rogan and sitting by a red curtain talking to someone for like 2 or 3 hours. But I do. And, we were proved wrong.
I mean, they're different. I only listen to Rogan. I only listen to your it's all on Spotify for me. But I guess different. I'm in the minority, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, yeah, me too. I consume it through headphones always. But if I'm surfing the internet and a Rogan clip comes up, it's very sticky. You know what I mean? Whereas if it's like what we've been doing, obviously, is just making one of those videos out of the sound that has a few sound waves and stuff. I'm not sticky to those. It's something about the ability to look at that person's face while they're talking that works very well.
Well, if you're going to do clips, which is probably something that's worthwhile for reach, then the face just on the thumbnail is very, I don't know, people see Joe Rogan or Elon Musk or whoever, or in the case of the German scene, there's a very prominent libertarian called Markus Krall, and that's like, all right, if people see his face on a thumbnail, that the chance that they'll click on it is, I don't know, 100-fold versus what we usually have. And that's one of the more prominent voices in the German-speaking libertarian movement. And that he was the most successful episode we have yet. And that's exactly the way that the podcast would grow, I presume, also for you, right? You have some guests. That's the way I listen to your podcast also. It's either the topic is interesting or the guest is interesting. And I don't know, maybe you have numbers on how many what the baseline numbers are of people who always listen.
That's the interesting thing. There is a baseline. And for example, we've had very famous guests, people like Zuby, with this guy Zuby. He's got over 1 million followers. And you get a spike, but it's interesting how few people remain, which I was surprised about. When you look back, if you look on the monthly chart, it's up and to the right like this. That's what it's doing, even though there are these spikes. It's very interesting. The number of listeners you get, it operates very similar to a market. You get spikes and then it retraces. You get unnatural spikes that come back to the, if you're looking at price charts of various things, it's very interesting. But every time there is a spike up, you tend to come back down to a sort of higher low. And that's been and I've always known that because I did a bit of research when I first started the podcast, and everyone told me, number one, make sure you get past the 5th or 6th episode because most people drop out at that point. And then after that, it's just about regularity. Doesn't matter what you're doing. I know people with podcasts that get millions of views and they were flatlining for years. And then it just takes something or one thing or a bit of luck or the industry you're in has a lot of interest or something. And then as long as you're a good podcast, but if you get to 100 episodes, you're probably okay.
There are two things. The one part is just in terms of the conversation has to be something interesting and worthwhile or natural also to listen to. And the other is, I guess, the algorithms. I mean, I've noticed, I think there's a chance that on Twitter you could, or on X, you can also host a podcast now. Or if you just put in the extra effort to pull out interesting parts of the podcast and post them as clips, that's the other part where it probably takes off. But I felt now that after 2 years, I think we're getting into a better, more natural flow, getting more interesting conversations out of it. So yeah, that just takes time. I mean, starting off, there was a lot of nervousness as far on my part, on my co-host part, and that's slowly but surely going away. And I think the listeners are probably more interested since then, yeah.
I think in my case, I have got so many more talking points than when I started. I can remember my first few interviews. I mean, I've done a lot of interviews in my time, in my other life, but it's a very specific, Free Cities, they were a very specific subject. I'd never thought about governance. I'd never thought about special economic zones. I'd never, I've listened back to a few of the early ones and they were, even though I thought at the time I was doing all right, I wasn't. Now I know almost all of the talking points, I think. So if anyone's bringing anything new to the table, I'm excited. And it helps massively. Even libertarianism, Austrian economics, whatever. I'm less strong on those subjects, but I think I've probably had the majority of the conversations you can have about them. So, which really helps in just keeping a conversation going, I think. I mean,
in terms of perhaps stuff, something that is not as obvious to international audience about Germany, the Bitcoin movement in Germany is, I don't know if it's per capita the strongest thing that is in the world. I would wager that it might be likely. So the 21, which is the German word for 21, is a movement, a club, whatever you want to call it. There are in every medium to certainly large cities, you have regular meetups and people doing Bitcoin maximalist advocacy or just connecting with each other. And I don't know why I might try to. So in Germany, the savings culture is very much I don't know, in the genes or in the culture. There's probably still a layover from the Weimar hyperinflation. It's certainly also the Deutschmark was also probably the strength of that was also a holdover of the Weimar hyperinflation. So and maybe that's carried over into that. I've also wondered in Switzerland, there's an indication that is actually a cultural thing. If you look at, for example, Switzerland, you have French-speaking, Italian-speaking, German-speaking. And interestingly, the interest in Bitcoin in the French-speaking Swiss area is not as high, right? So if it were just a regulatory thing, right, which you might think based on what in Germany you can hold Bitcoin for 1 year and then any profits are tax-free. So you might think it's a regulatory thing, but it isn't, because in Switzerland, the regulation is the same, no matter where you are in Switzerland, French-speaking or German-speaking. So it's a good indication that it's a cultural thing. And of course, that's also swept over into, I think, the Austrian school. I mean, lots of people say that they come to the Austrian school via their interest in Bitcoin. It was the other way around for me and for quite a few at the Mises Institute. But if you go to these meetups, you do see that people are trying to understand Austrian economics and getting into more and more into libertarianism. I mean, Bitcoin is for everybody, even for non-libertarians, of course. But I do think there's a good tendency towards libertarianism also from that side.
My thing about libertarianism, I suppose, is that I feel that the political process is something that doesn't interest me. Therefore, I would not care to be a libertarian, and in fact, I would find that constricting. I would think that trying to, win an election as a libertarian would be number one, a strange thing. Anyway, I've got no interest in politics at all. Yeah. But then it's one of those funny kind of quirks that you're basically, I don't know, you're going to correct me here, I'm sure, but as a libertarian, presumably you kind of just want people to be left alone. Yeah. Right. Which is a hard thing to campaign on, because you're kind of campaigning in the arena of people that don't leave people alone, if you see what I mean.
First of all, I wouldn't actually even say I want people to be left alone. I more say I want to be left alone. I mean, I really don't want to say anything about what anybody else should do. I just, other than that, they should leave me or people like me alone. And I don't know, I don't want to come off as preachy here. So, I mean, there are lots of different reasons to participate in a libertarian movement. And I never want... There are few people who are... we have a magazine that's been going on since 1998, and one of the writers there has cautioned me or people in my party to not invest themselves too much into a positive political outcome. And I can understand that, and it's not one of my... I will not make my happiness dependent upon the German people coming to their senses. All right, so I'm just trying to find freedom for myself and for people like me, and I think that just communicating this is already worthwhile. There are plenty of young people, I think, who they're neutral to start with. They've gone through some, let's say, indoctrination would be a harsher term, but very much influenced by society at large. And I think the libertarians are born that they're not indoctrinated, so they just have never heard of libertarianism. And if they can hear that this is a way of thinking about the world or about society, then that's a path forward for them in their lives. So if you could also view the Libertarian Party of a movement as, let's say, a start of a sales funnel into the Free Cities project, if you like, right? So that's the way I see it. I think it's worthwhile just from that perspective. I don't anticipate that we will necessarily have political success, but also the fact is that Milei did have success. It is a low probability, and it would be a shame if we didn't have the setup available, the party apparatus set up there, so to take advantage of that and only start getting that running when the figure, whoever it happens to be, who can push that forward, comes into the arena.
I suppose you're absolutely right. Milei's rise to power has obviously come from the fact that he's an equal and opposite force to what was before. And I think it's fair to say we see a similar trajectory in Europe, do we? Of more regulation, more... Yeah. So there's no reason to believe that in 4, 8, 12, 16 years, libertarian ideas might be very much more prevalent.
And it's also, I think, contrast makes things more visible, right? And that's probably what happened in Argentina. And I think that there are plenty of people in Germany who very much see how things are going wrong, and have been saying how things have been going wrong since Merkel has probably started. And that contrast maybe, who knows, sets Germany up to be a better candidate to go in a libertarian direction in the midterm to long term than other countries. They say Germans are romantics, right, in the sense that they follow an ideal to the bitter end, right, whatever, and to their own detriment. But who knows? Maybe if they figure out that the ideal is freedom, then they will follow that to the bitter end, and then Germany might be the libertarian utopia at some point. I don't expect it, but that's the thing. It's I think there are other cultures who muddle themselves through life. I think I come from Ireland originally, and I think that's very much characteristic of they don't take anything too seriously relative to Germans anyway. And so that may be an advantage at some point for the Germans.
Do you happen to think, by the way, you've got a German accent, but you're Irish, is that right?
I was born in Ireland, yes.
Was Irish Irish or English your first language?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a
I've been
German
in
accent.
Germany for 20 years now, so
that's funny.
That changes it.
I figured it was the other way around. I thought you had a very good English accent.
Sorry, 30 years by now.
Right. No, back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Do you think then that you were saying that, and this was my experience, I'd never heard about libertarian ideas. So, but what they did was kind of confirm feelings, thoughts that I had. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a libertarian, but the notion of having certain governance structures and being left alone and things like that were only things I thought about when I started mixing with people that started espousing those ideas, right? So are we to assume from that little bit of an anecdote that this is a time in history, because of the internet, that maybe libertarian ideas might get an absolute pump, a really big following, which is something we've not seen before historically, right?
Yeah, I think so, or at least there's a chance for that. I mean, I always frame this in terms of centralized media versus decentralized media. The more centralized the media, in particular when before the printing press, right, you have a certain organization who has a dominance over the public discourse or what people think. And then with the printing press, it's a more decentralized thing with lots of tumult or churn in terms of what people think, especially in terms of religion. And then we had a return back to more centralized media when the broadcast turns up with the radio and television. So there you again have the chance for particular institutions, powerful institutions, to gain control over what people think. And of course, very much to the detriment of Germany in that case, the so-called Volksempfänger, the radio of the people, if you will, which, you know, Hitler spoke directly to the people, and they, I don't know, they didn't push back or fell for it. And then that goes on, I would say, all the way through to the 90s. And slowly but surely now we're moving back towards decentralized media where libertarian ideas again have a chance. And this is, at least for me, speaking from my journey with the Ron Paul movement, was that you wouldn't have known about Ron Paul to start with if it weren't for the internet back then, even without podcasts. And I think, it was, there was video back then, but not the podcast stuff wasn't, I think, is that prevalent. But be that as it may, I think, the chance for the truth to come out is much more likely versus propaganda. And there's a war going on there, of course, on X is the most prominent thing right now. So I think we do have a chance. And, well, it depends, of course, on what people really care, how much they care about the truth. And, of course, it might sound arrogant, but I do believe that libertarian is just a basic idea about how we live together. It's just, all right, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, and apply that at writ large. And so I don't think, I think if people try to work through that rather than be team blue or team red, which is the other approach, right? If the political field, the game, is a question of interest groups. And if you think of it in terms of football or soccer for the Americans, the way the politics works is, all right, you have one team or the other team, and applied to politics, each of them they switch back and forth writing in the law, which is, absurd if you think about a fair game, right? You don't get the one guy to write into the law, all right, the other guy only gets to have 10 or 9 or 8 players, while we have 11, and then a few years later switch back. That's an absurd game. You need to have a neutral, fair set of rules, which is the libertarian ethics, as far as I'm concerned. And of course, the libertarians are the one guy on the field, just a very small minority trying to say, all right, we need to have a fair set of rules here. And so far, we haven't been able to be heard because that's not the general approach. And I think, the movement is growing, and it's also growing in Germany, certainly not as large as elsewhere. But yeah, the new media makes it possible.
I assume that smaller government and less regulation is also on the agenda for a Libertarian Party. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we will propagate as far as we propagate what we think are the right rules in the German context. What the next step forward is, reasonably speaking. There is the DSA rule, the EU. There is currently, I forget, don't know what the right translation. There are efforts to implement censorship in Germany or in the EU towards the social media platforms, which we can push against. We can make banal suggestions such as that the nuclear power plants should be turned back on. Just absurd things like that. We can, but the thing is, my impression is, if the public at large adopts these ideas, then politics follows suit, right? No matter if it's a libertarian or another party, right? There's an old saying that politics is downstream of culture. Of course, culture is downstream from reality, and we're just trying to explain the ideas and trying to persuade the public. So whether or not the one thing that might be our make the party give it a chance at success is the fact that we'll be consistently talking about these things for years and always in a consistent way without flip-flopping. That's the principal approach of libertarians is makes them believable versus the other party, which currently the CDU, the Christian Party in Germany, is somebody that the main guy suggested, Christian Merz. He said to turn back on the nuclear power plants. He just said that a few days ago, and well, they're the party that turned them off. So I mean, how believe? But if we have a principled approach, then perhaps people will be more think the Libertarian Party is more trustworthy in that sense.
Going back to the way that the information gets disseminated, you've got an opinion on podcasts as a medium, which are obviously very, very popular. Do you think they have a long and prosperous life ahead of them, or do you think they are something that are peaking now, will peak soon? Because there's as a medium, it is saturated.
Yeah.
But what do you think about it? I mean, there's the school of thought that says it's like books. You know, the invention of books was a way to disseminate information, the printing press, and they didn't go away. They've somewhat gone away now because of digital. But and it's the dissemination of the spoken word in a very ubiquitous way. Do you think it's that big a deal, or do you think that this is a kind of short-term?
I could go either way on this. I mean, in a certain sense, you can think of it in terms of how did people communicate for tens of thousands of years before the written word, by speech. This is going back to a very ancient way of communicating. And in that sense, you know, it's a very, you would think it has a very good chance. And then the other question is, well, people are, I don't know, it's a TikTok, they have their mind fried by the apps. Can they actually listen for that long? Do they want to listen for that long? Or will the attention be distributed so far and wide that, yes, perhaps podcasts are, you know, will have success in the sense that everybody listens to them, but they'll all still be in their bubble and nobody will, they're not talking to each other. Maybe that's not your question, but...
No, I'm interested in anything to do with the future of it, because obviously I'm invested in it.
Yeah.
And I want to challenge my own preconceptions about it.
Well, Rogan is certainly doing the one thing right, which is he seems very, he doesn't seem team blue or team red, right? People, I think, can listen to him and say, all right, maybe he's not the brightest or the most intelligent in certain topics, or he has some preconceptions, but he's not trying to, he's not ideologically invested in either side. So that makes it, that's a good precondition to have conversations with people. I think, what was the recent senator that from the Democratic Party that he had on as a guest after Vance?
I don't know. I switch off on those guys, to be honest.
Well, but in any case, it's clear that he's trying to get both voices now. As he tried to get Kamala on before the election. So I think he's trying to be as balanced as he can be. And that's the kind of conversation that probably people want to listen to. So
I suppose with regards to the TikTok generation, I suppose there's two things at work there. One is that they will mature into long-form conversation, which is obviously potential. The other that just occurred to me while you were speaking is that podcasting could represent the base layer of this medium, because podcasts get cut into TikToks very easily.
Yeah.
So maybe, I mean, I obviously believe there is this longevity. I'm with you on the storytelling. I've been a storyteller my whole life in the media and films and etc. And and I'm older now, but I do now realize, after coming along a trajectory from photography into film and now into the spoken word, that the spoken word is the single best way to communicate. Films are great, but they take a lot of effort. They move incredibly slowly, and you've got to do very well and invest a lot of money to get an absolute killer film that changes people's hearts and minds. Whereas you can put out a podcast a day at very little cost and have much more impact, in my opinion, than you know. But yeah, I mean, you can rehash a podcast into anything you want these days, and
certainly as far as ideas go, they're the preeminent media, I would say. If the question then is, do people care about ideas? They want to. I think there are many people who want to listen and understand, is somebody authentic? Do they actually believe something? And what are their arguments? Or how do they deal with counter arguments? And that's much better invested time versus listening to prefabricated talking points. And of course, then you need to have pushback there, right? That's the one thing that I don't quite like, which, I don't know, it's not the role of our podcast necessarily, which we're talking mostly to friends, right? The critical kind of podcast, which I think the Rogan Trump podcast was somewhat representative of that. It'd be interesting to hear what it would look like between a 3-hour-long podcast between Trump and an even more adversarial guest or host. And I think if you look at the Musk versus what is his name again, Don Lemon, I believe. Mm-hmm. If you look at that interview, it seems, if you look at that interview as a Democrat, I think, or as a Musk critic, I think you would have to go away from that thinking Don Lemon didn't do that right. Maybe you're not convinced that Musk is an awesome guy, but that's not. But he did hold his own in terms of being able to confront arguments that criticism against him. So that's something you can get out of podcasts, right? An honest impression of what ideas work or who has the better ideas. And
I mean, I'd say what you're describing is an absolute cultural shift, because at least in recent times, the journalistic interview had become basically a propaganda mechanism. It's as simple as. And as such, you would have to enter into an interview with an idea of what you are trying to achieve. Whereas the modern podcaster, if he's good or she's good, I think, allows the person to speak. And that's your content. Yeah. That's all you really want. And it doesn't matter who comes on your show. And actually, then you're not adversarial necessarily. You ask questions. But the former journalist has to be adversarial because he's trying to get a moment. He's trying to get you. He's trying to capture you. I'm not trying to capture anyone. In fact, the opposite. If you tell me the world's flat, I want to hear your arguments. I want you to challenge me. I want to go... Because you might convince me the world's flat, which would be phenomenal. I don't think you will, but you could try. And then at least I can point out my counter arguments. And we're not fighting here. We're just trying to get to the truth. Unfortunately, the way of the legacy media is to try to get to their narrative. It's not to actually get to the truth. We're looking to find and justify their narrative. And that's that's why... Nobody. Well, who watches it now? I mean, it's... Well,
by now it's immortalized, I would say, by the meme. So what you're saying is the Kathy Newman interview.
That was absolutely phenomenal. I've watched that a number of times. It's an incredible bit of history. I mean, really, the funniest thing about it as well is it's Channel 4 News. Because they are, of all the news organisations, they're the one that really think they're better than everyone. All right. You don't know. Look, well, as an English person, then you'll know.
No, I'm from Ireland. And I was 10 years old when I left the country. So.
Right. Well, Channel 4, they have, they're very, very I mean, they're all patronising. The BBC, they're all patronising. But Channel 4 are kind of like a little notch above everyone else. Hence, a lady can actually try her hardest to put words in someone's mouth, literally over and over again. So what you're saying is, and it's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And obviously, God bless Jordan Peterson for just staying with it. Because it does. The gotcha moments only occur when you actually rise up and make a mistake, basically.
Well, getting back to your question, whether or not it will have a huge impact, the question is then, will the general public see these kinds of interviews as the source of truth? Right? Maybe they don't even listen to the interviews themselves, but they would have to, if this is going to be the dominant media that influences how people think. I don't think it's going to scale to the point that everybody will listen to 3-hour-long interviews, but it would have to scale to the point of, all right, this person that I can trust, I've listened to at least enough interviews with that person that I think he has my best interests at heart, or he's a good, intelligent person, he knows how to think, that they have listened to these interviews or they have had this guest on, and whatever they're showing to me is not a misrepresentation. So there has to be some second order processing of this huge torrent of media that comes out, because I'm not going to listen to 3 hours of interviews with every single presidential candidate and so forth. So that there has to be some level of aggregation.
Mm. The other thing, of course, is you can now translate video and audio into other languages, which is a really mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think that the spoken word being transmitted all over the world is a revolution, then imagine when it goes into 40 languages immediately. And I, for one, I'd love to know what podcasts are like in China or in Cambodia, or, I want to know what they're talking about. I just love to hear the authentic conversation just translated straight into English. And it's there happening now. There are, even someone blew my mind the other day, sent me a link said, click on this. And it was it's part of Google's ecosystem. Google something it is anyway, and it will digest anything. So he said, look, I've sent one of your podcasts, and it was a 4-hour podcast. He said, I just wanted to know what it was about. He sent it to this AI, it digested it, and it created a 10-minute podcast of two people speaking to each other about the content in that podcast, indistinguishable from...
And a real life conversation.
Yeah, with anecdotes, with words and laughs and ha-ha and all this kind of stuff. And now that's just gone visual as well. So now they are two hosts. It took 10 minutes to do 4 hours. So the future, like I say, podcasting's like the base layer of this. You know what I mean? Like the rest of it, all these things like getting built on top as ways to disseminate the crux of what you're talking about, or pick out the best bit, or make it digestible. And sure, you can always, it's like Bitcoin, you can send a base layer transaction if you want. But it's complicated, slow, and probably expensive. But if you really, if you want to use a secondary or third layer, then you can do all kinds of stuff. And podcasting will be like that, I'm sure. It's the layer of information,
Yeah, it's going to become one big global village if that pans out. I would love to know about what do people in South Korea think about their demographics? What do the people in Taiwan think about the chances of them being the CCP? What do people in Iran think about the mullahs? There's so much stuff that is behind a wall of language.
Yes.
And whether or not that happens, I don't know. People in Germany, who knows? Well, there are currently polls. It's just topic du jour. Sorry to go on about the American election, but the people in Germany are so insulated in terms of what they think about the chances of Kamala winning. Or I shouldn't say people in general. They're public polls, and it indicates that they very much think that Kamala is going to win. And she might, but it's not a certainty. It's like 50-50 or something. And that there's a very much misperception there. And I don't know that has very much to do with language. That's such a topic, such a prominent topic, that you would think they would have enough angles to be informed about it. But going back to the question of how we will deal with all this media, if we translate all these podcasts or all this information from different languages, it will go again to the level of aggregation. All right, I would like to be informed by people who actually talk to others rather than have their own biases confirmed, and that they preferably go as close to the root source as possible.
And it might even be, just thinking about it, that it'll be a reinventing of the news institution. It might even be that an AI digests a cross-section of what you're interested in and then presents it to you in a new program as a new, and you can program your algorithm yourself, so you won't care. It'll just, it won't be like the someone won't be editing and curating your content for you. You will.
Yeah.
And then it will be produced into something you can listen to every day and digest. The options are endless as I think about them, and I think it's the reason why we're living in such chaotic times. This information overload, this amount of new information is just giving people unlimited ideas, unlimited new ways of thinking, unlimited, and it's a good few years, I think, before everything settles down.
There will be personal responsibility in terms of information consumption is, I think, a big aspect that we have to look into. I think there's a recent, I don't know if it's a movement, is probably too big of a term, but to not give children access to a cell phone before the age of before the 8th grade. And that's just an example of, all right, there's certain, let's say, dysfunctional approaches to media that we have to work out. Is there a barrier that we can put in there? And I think that's mostly related to the interactions between children in their classes. So that's not necessarily media, but it is a new development where how we deal with it has to change. The algorithms, of course, at least that's my understanding, is they feed you whatever keeps your attention. And if you let yourself be consumed by rage bait, then you'll see more rage bait. And you have to understand that lots of what you see online is probably there's a good portion of it that is propaganda. I mean, it goes either way. In Germany, I think there's a very good chance that, for example, the Green Party they're probably not explicitly financed, but it seems like they're acting towards Russian interests. If you think about who benefits, at least before the war, of shutting down power plants and pushing up, spending more and more money on solar power and wind power. It's the peaker plants that you need to compensate for the fluctuations in the power grid. And that's, of course, powered by natural gas, which you get from Russia. So and I think that's a long-standing thing that if you can go back to the 80s and say, all right, in whose interest is it to combine these topics of power generation via nuclear power or via and the topic of atom bombs, right? To just say both of that is nuclear and is bad, right? That's just the meme. And I think it's a very good chance that on the one hand, it's the coal power lobby that would have had an interest in shutting down nuclear power plants. And of course, it would have been the USSR back then to make it so that, we want no nuclear anything in Germany, right? It's the same thing as currently at least according to Russia, their own statements. They don't want, they want to have a NATO be a little further off of their doorstep. And so there are interests there. That's what you always have to be asking yourself. What is this feed that I'm getting in front of myself? Whose interests are being propagated there? And for libertarians, in a certain sense, it's a lot easier. We always go back to principles. I mean, whether or not Nord Stream was blown up by the Americans or the Ukrainians or the Russians, I mean, those are interesting topics, and there's so much disinformation or information that you cannot judge where it comes from, whether or not it's true. But we always can go back to principles again, and so we have a little bit easier. But I find people, I think, don't adjust their algorithm very much. I mean, regularly on YouTube, I will click on videos, say, don't show me anything from this channel ever again. I mean, this is just attention-grabbing stuff that I don't need to see. And same on Twitter. You can say, show me less of this, mute this person, and so forth. And I think if you just interact with it on a basis of, all right, like this and view this without curating a little bit, you're probably being fed on your let's say your primitive part of your brain is being fed more than what you rationally would want to actually see.
You're making a good case there for the decentralized media. Nostr, which we use now, is the first time you actually... The algorithms are open source. and you can pick whichever ones you want. You can choose your algorithm. And funnily enough, so far, it's annoying because I keep, like, what's happening on my, you know what Nostr is?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. On my Nostr feed, I see too much of the people that tweet all the time, basically. So I'm going to have to, I'm going through the process myself now, right? Thinking, oh, okay, right. I see why we do need some kind of moderation. And these are people I follow on purpose and like. But what I didn't realize was one of the things that the former media does well is it doesn't show you all the tweets of the people, because some people tweet every 10 minutes. It's unbelievable. I didn't realize it. You know, and I don't want it. After a while, I block. So actually, at the moment, I've actually blocked people I like because I just can't. I can't see any more of their tweets or whatever they're called, their notes.
Do you think that as part in Nostr, there's not enough content to give you a distribution? Right. I think if whatever your client, Nostr client is, I would assume that they would filter. They have to have every app has to have some method to say this comes first and next.
Yes.
And if you're, I don't know, do you have it selected based on just whatever's most recent, or how do you look at that?
It depends which client you're using. You can do it like that. You can do trending, so you can do not people you're following, or on mine you can do chronological on one side. If you flick to the other side, it's conversations. So it just shows you chronologically who's things. One's posts, one's conversations. Yeah. But on other clients, you can do all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And really, the future I see of this is open sourcing all algorithms. Yeah. So if you write an algorithm, you could even sell it. If it's a good algorithm, you could even there'll be a marketplace for algorithms, I would imagine, and that would make total sense to me. Yeah. Because on Nostr, you do the same thing with relays. You pick the relays you want because they're filtering out the crap. Because it's a completely Wild West. You can put anything you want on there, and I actually pay for my. I use it's like whatever 10,000 sats a month or something, but it's a good one. And it's people I know who care and who filter out the crap, and they're not censoring. And I'll stay with them as long as they do that. If they don't, I'll move to another one. And that's the beauty of it. That the nodes are there's so many of them to choose from. But it's a fledgling thing. It has opened my eyes to some of the good things about the former way. It was the centralized version.
Well, the algorithm, let's say. I mean, the question is, can you replicate the algorithm on Nostr? And if you're going to filter just based on time, then of course people who constantly publish, they're going to have an advantage, or they're going to be overrepresented. That's the question. Can you have an algorithm that, let's say, cuts off? All right, if a guy has 100 tweets, let's just show the one of them whichever had the largest impact, or the largest impact in any kind of network connected way to me, in terms of like trying to judge what relevance is. And that would be whatever the algorithm. You would want to look at the algorithm.
But it would also, if you, it's very easy to build it into the client, so that you can feed it information about what you like. And instead of, in Twitter, Twitter's, like you say, is actually, the function of Twitter is to show you content that keeps you there. Whereas if you design your own algorithm, you're much more in control, and you're never going to see someone getting their head cut off, because you literally aren't following anyone that posts that kind of stuff. And I see a lot of benefit there. Obviously, I see it's the complete future. I think we need decentralized. We need a decentralized internet for part of the internet. We need it because the centralized part of the internet is captured quite substantially.
Well, then the question would be, honestly, what do you want to see? And there are many people who maybe they actually want to be enraged all the time. I don't know if that's something that they.
For sure.
And then the other question is, all right, the aspect that has certainly been, if I look back at my comedian consumption, you want to have some chance at serendipity. You want to have variation in there that, all right, there's certain, I mean, if I hadn't been looking at a broad set of stuff back in 2007, 2000, I wouldn't have found libertarian ideas. I wouldn't have figured out, all right, actually, to my knowledge, best I can remember, my first entry into libertarianism was Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, which, I don't know, maybe it was in the ether because of the Ron Paul campaign, but it wasn't a direct recommendation by anybody from that circle. So who knows? But that's the kind of thing where you don't know what you don't know. So there's a certain level of wide media that you would have to look at to figure out, all right, there's something, it would have to be a discovery for you. So that's one thing that people presumably will not want to look at. And probably lots of people just want to, I don't know, there are people who look at trash TV just to relax and feel better about themselves. There are lots of reasons to look at this, and you would, I guess, have to be a little bit honest to yourself about what you actually want to see or get from your algorithm.
Yes. I mean, in my case, I agree. But I would flick over to Twitter when I need that, or and look at the reels. What I actually discovered myself, I created my own follow list as well, because I didn't really know. It's very Nosta's harder to know who is you're following as well, because people often take on different personas there, and it's more anonymous. But instead of migrating all my Twitter followers over there, I went over, I checked out a few of my friends, and I automatically followed everyone they're following. And then over a period of a month, I unfollowed the ones that were showing me stuff that I didn't want to see. And I was quite brutal, because it's mainly Bitcoiners over there. And I just wanted the hardcore Bitcoin content. I didn't want anything about, even if someone posted something about a football game, I just, no, you're not the guy I want. And I've actually got a pretty good curated list now. It's really good. It's updating constantly, and it's stuff properly related to what I want to find out about. I don't want anything else. I don't even really, if you're talking about the election, it has to be about, in context of Bitcoin. I don't really want to know any of your other personal things. And yeah, it's worked. Can I ask you actually about the Libertarian Party in Germany? Is it right? Did I hear correctly? You have started it with someone else?
Well, there were 100 and something members. It's a relatively small group, but it's been around. We founded in 2022, so it's also relatively recent. And so there are other people involved, sure.
And what's your position in the Libertarian Party?
I'm I think the CFO, you would say. I mean, we have a small account. We have a little budget, enough budget for travel, for example, to the Free Cities conference here in Prague. And but yeah, that's we're hoping to do a festival next year. We're hoping to participate in the federal elections next year. So yeah,
And how many people in federal elections? How many candidates do you have?
Oh, there's it's called a listen. There's a list that you put up, and however many votes you get, they go down the list, and that's how many candidates. So we would put up a list with the candidates we feel are most appropriate. Ideally, this is not decided at this point, but from my preference would be that we would disjoin party membership from people on the list. That is to say, all right, we want people on the list who are qualified for the position and that we can hold accountable in the sense that, all right, they're paid from party funds, and if they don't do the plumb line libertarian positions, then all right, we have some consequence that we impose on them in terms of their remuneration.
And presumably the COVID situation was important for you.
Yeah.
Especially 2022, you say you founded it. That's kind of just at the back end of all that stuff, wasn't it?
Very much so. I mean, in Germany, there are quite a few media incidents, let's say, that I think you can see the establishment showing their cards. And in early 2022, the vaccine mandate discussion was going on, and there was going to be a a mandate or a vote on the mandate in I believe it was March or April. So there were millions of people on the streets. You would never know that they were on the street if you had been watching public television in Germany. But you could look out your window, of course, so you would have seen them. There are a few others. I mean, there was the farmers' protests in the Netherlands that, you'd think it would have been shown up on the media that somebody was shot at by the police. Worth a mention, wasn't it? Or the Canadian trucker protests and so forth. So yeah, and that of course also applies to Germany. The farmer protests also early this year. There's another moment where they couldn't suppress it in the sense or paint it in a bad light, but they could form an alternative thing. They could pivot the media narrative, and they managed to do that with a topic related to migrants and people being for mass deportation. So they switched the narrative to, I don't know, this is a conspiracy theory, but in any case, that's why the media narrative shifted towards that rather than talking about the grievances of farmers. And yes, the libertarian movement has grown by leaps and bounds in the course of the whole COVID situation. And the libertarian movement, we had festivals going on, and I've connected with so many people since that time. I don't know, sometimes there are still new people who come into our online forums, and the revelation to them, oh, they're German-speaking libertarians. It's like they've been libertarians for years, but all they ever saw was the Mises Institute and the English-speaking group, but very much so. I mean, I still add that if you're a young libertarian, I would say, learn something that is not doesn't tie you down to being in Germany. Don't want anybody in particular to tie themselves to Germany if they don't have to, and perhaps move to Switzerland as a favorite destination, or wherever else you happen to want to go. And but even so, even with the people who want to stay in Germany, it has been growing, and there's still lots in terms of our communication that we have to do. Markus Krall, as I said earlier, is also a huge voice in he's more of a gold bug, I would say. He's not critical, I would say, of Bitcoin in the sense that he's putting down, but he's skeptical. Let's say he's a bit of a hands-off approach. But yeah, he's very popular. He's started the Atlas Initiative, which is Atlas Society, if you want to translate it roughly, which is, I don't know, a few thousand members probably, and regular meetups all over Germany. So there is a libertarian or even more liberty-minded movement. There's a former AfD politician also, which, interesting enough, so in the AfD party, which is framed as far-right party in Germany, but there's always been, and it was originally started as a, let's say, market liberal organization, and there has always remained a wing of that party. It was there are the let's say National Socialist, let's say patriotic solidarity, if you want to put it in maybe less terms that aren't so crass, but there's always been the other wing, and Frauke Petry, which is this former AfD politician, has been working on a new movement, now that the FDP, the current Liberal Party, is in the downswing. They see an opportunity to supplant them, replace them, and interestingly enough, they adopted the name Team Freiheit, Team Freedom, which is a pushback also, or a throwback to the to the COVID time. Because in the COVID time, the framing was, all right, Team Caution versus Team Freedom. So now they're picking up that label from the COVID time and saying, all right, what we generally need in all realms of society is freedom. So I think there is a very much, it also has to do, of course, with the disillusionment of with the current parties. If you look at the elections 2021, the two parties did particularly well in that election. That was the Greens and the FDP. And that was even more so among the younger demographic, right? The younger demographic, lots of them voted for the Liberal Party. I mean this in the European sense, liberal, so as in ostensibly for freedom. And presumably with the idea, I'm guessing now, that they're not going to implement even more and more restrictions. And at that time of the federal election 21, it was propagated by practically everybody that there won't be any vaccine mandates. So that was all right. Presumably, I would say that was part of the reason that they were voted for. And of course, that's not what happened. The vote for the vaccine mandate did happen and go forward. And I think that is also part of what's contributed to the disillusionment with the established parties. So yeah, the developments in Germany in relation to COVID has certainly contributed to our growth. We're still a very, very small party, but even so, we're principled libertarians, of course, which is, let's say, if you're a German politician trying to gain, we have to get above 5% to even get into parliament, which is a huge challenge for us as a small party. But if you want to, let's say, have a more broad-based platform, then you wouldn't. Then our approach is the wrong one, right? At least in the short term, right? In the long term, I'd say we have a better chance, but in the short term, as Frauke Petri of the AfD, formerly of the AfD, is trying to do, you want to have a more general freedom platform. And, we'll see if she has success in the next federal election.
With regards to the COVID thing that happened, there's two schools of thought here, in as much as most people suspect that at some point something similar will happen again. And by that, I don't mean that it would be a pandemic, but it would be something that would arouse the state to take measures along the same lines. Yeah. Now, according to you, do you think there would be a much bigger pushback the second time around?
Well, they say that the generals are always fighting the battle, the previous battle, the previous war, and so it's not going to be another pandemic. So, and precisely for the reason you say, there would be more pushback. I think that's part of the reason, honestly, that Sweden didn't have such draconian measures, because to my understanding, they had a more draconian approach toward the swine flu in, I think that was 2008 or 7 or something. I can't remember the precise date, but a decade or so prior. And the pushback in Sweden would have been larger this time around, so they didn't even push to let people be more free. And so yeah, the question is then, all right, if they start with something else, let's say, I don't know, there's a new financial crisis or a government debt crisis, and well, that means we have to print more money or print, or in the case of Europe, what is a not unlikely scenario would be, all right, we have some countries going into default or at risk of going to default, similar to what happened in Greece in 2013. And all right, if Italy, if we're going to have to bail out Italy, well, then that's their excuse to implement Eurobonds, right? Which is part of what the recently Mario Draghi had this report that he put on acknowledging difficulties in terms of growth in Europe. And, well, part of the reason for that is very likely that they want to have a justification for Eurobonds to finance industrial build-up, I guess, state-based, state-financed subsidies. So that would be something where they would say, all right, if we have a crisis, then we already have been trying to push for the Eurobonds for decades. Well, I don't know decades, but quite a while. But and that would be a reason for them to do that. And of course, you'd assume that the central bank has some involvement there, and the euro would be devalued. Whether or not there would be pushback by the general public, I doubt it on that particular topic. That seems to be next on the agenda. What else would they try to do? Probably censorship. What would be the catalyst? Because there always has to be an element of fear involved, doesn't there?
I think the most obvious long-term one will be climate restrictions. That seems, especially in Germany, and that would involve the curbing your ability to use carbon, which is a form of a lockdown.
But how are you going to get an element of fear in there?
Well, the fear is we're all going to die. I mean,
but that's been going on for over a decade now.
I agree. But I think a lot of people still are very invested in it.
Yes, but I think maybe it has to be urgent, doesn't it?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the way I would see it panning out would be like a carbon score.
Yeah,
you know, that seems very easy to roll out. And I
yeah.
But once it's been rolled out, it's very easy to add little algorithms, additions to it, and before you know it, you can't drive your car, or you can only go on holiday once a year because it's all wrapped up in a score, which is miles, say, and you have to decide between your car and a plane. Plane miles cost more than you know.
That's the incremental approach to implementing restrictions doesn't require urgency. That much is correct. I was thinking in terms of, all right, if they want to do another lockdown or want to implement something that directly attacks your bodily autonomy, that would require something where it's urgent, I would say. But yes, this creeping step-by-step approach into socialism, the Germans are still big fans of their cash, as in paper money, and not using digital or even credit cards. So that's that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to take a while. If the control is going to happen via a digital currency system, at least in Germany.
That's interesting. I didn't realize you were a big cash country.
Yeah.
And have they limited cash payments there yet? You know.
Yeah, there are. I think you cannot have cash payments above 10,000 euro, and they've been trying to.
That's quite a lot. Really. I mean, I think in other countries it's 1,000 now. Sometimes, maybe some of the Scandinavian countries it's down to.
Well, if you want to buy gold, I believe that every gold seller has to verify your ID. And that's I think already at 1,000. It might be 2,000. So there's some transactions that are much more limited. But even cars. I bought a car with cash at some point, and of course, relatively affordable car. So that's still a regular thing that happens. But yeah, they are trying to pull it down. They are trying to limit it under the guise of money laundering and terrorist financing and so forth. Yeah, that's the usual thing.
Are you on one of those people that believes in a pretty dystopian trajectory that we're on? I mean, it's easy to see when you add all these little stages up: COVID restrictions, carbon scores, governments that all walk in lockstep all around the world. How do you feel about all that stuff? Is it an inevitable future for the majority of people?
No, I'm not. I don't think it's inevitable. I'm not a utopian or dystopian in that sense. they don't have as much control as they would like, or the worst people think they believe. I mean, I prep a very marginal amount. I have some cash that I keep in available in grip, and I have I don't know, the most basic thing that you can do in case of a power outage is at least have a few gallons of water, drinking water that you can because if the pumps aren't working, you're not going to have any water, which is the most basic thing you need as a human. But it's like I don't have canned food or anything like that. So I'm not dystopian in that sense. I think you should have an exit plan, and this, if war breaks out, I think you want to be able to leave the country. That's something that you would also want to have that cash for. You might need to bribe some people to get past the checkpoint.
War where though?
Well, for me, that's Ireland. That's if, but for other people, you need to figure it out.
But are you talking about a war in, a kind of Russia versus somebody?
Yeah.
But would it reach with you there?
I don't know.
Where would you
go? It's a low probability. I wouldn't say it's higher probability than 1 in 100, but I mean 1 in 100 in being sent into the meat grinder. I mean that's worth prepping a little bit for.
Right? I see. Being told to go to fight.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I missed that one. Yeah, I never even thought of that one. There's no way I would go and fight a war in Russia. I don't know. I would.
But the thing is, if the war propaganda, I mean, you just think back into the COVID times. One step of escalation after the other. People would not have jumped from the mindset that they had in February 2020 directly into the mindset of early 2022, where the debate was raging regarding the vaccine mandates. I mean, people wanting to, what in German we say Bürgerrechte, basic human rights of bodily autonomy,
being taken,
being
retracted.
That you don't get from one place to the other without a constant escalation. So if I can see people being sent to the front lines via the same process, it just has to the war has to escalate bit by bit. And at some point, I mean, what was it? Ludwig von Mises he didn't leave Switzerland before Paris was taken over by the Nazis. That was how far they had to go for him to realize that Europe is not a safe place for him. And then he got out of Dodge and fled over to New York. And I mean, it's the same. It's a similar thing. You people are, I don't know, status quo biased, I guess. They think that things have gone all right so far, but things can change over time. And I think if I want to think ahead, I don't want to be jumping into action at a too late of a moment. So I'd rather have, okay, I need some cash, I need a passport, I need to have a route, and ideally know what I'm going to pack. And that's not too much to ask to get out of Dodge.
I have never framed it like that. I've never thought of it in those terms. I've always been thinking the government imposing too many rules and regulations would force me out, but not conscription. I mean, that is an interesting thought that I'm kind of following out of my mind. I would almost certainly be in Central America with my family if that. Well, that's started happening.
In Germany, as far as the law is concerned, there is officially still conscription, and I did do the Ersatzdienst, the substitute civil service. So you have the choice back then of either doing military boot camp. I'm not sure what the proper phrasing is. You spend a few months getting probably in the best shape of your life. But drilled by the government, of course, and but you have a choice to do the civil service, which is what I did, and but that's right now just suspended. It's not off the books. It can be enacted at a moment's notice. And I mean, Russia is probably not going to go to war, but you never know. I mean, if things might escalate for the stupidest of reasons, and all of a sudden NATO is in war, is at war, right? There was this, I think, Poland. It's a year ago, maybe a bit more so ago. Apparently, a missile that was claimed to be Russian, fell onto. Blew up on Polish territory. You might have constructed the NATO defense case out of that. I'm not sure what the phrasing is, but there's when NATO is attacked, you can go to war against the adversary, and that might have been taken as a reason to go to war. And at that point, maybe German soldiers would have been at the front line.
I think as well, most things that start wars, well, not most. I'm making this up as I go along, but I know a lot of things that have started wars that turned out to be done on purpose to start the war. So,
if you're Ukrainian or interested in expanding the defense for Ukraine, I mean, why not get the bigger guys to jump to action? It seems in your interest.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've spoken to a few people on this podcast who think that the biggest actual existential threat is nuclear war. At some point, at least in the next 100 years. I mean, it's very easy to imagine that something like that would happen simply because even just the trajectory that technology is on, allowing people to have access to, technologies which are pretty destructive. I mean, the more I think about it, the more, I had an off-camera conversation with someone the other day about drones and about what the future of military drone technology would be. And it's a harrowing thought.
You've seen the Chinese fireworks kind of displays?
It's not Chinese. There was one in Italy the other day.
All right.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I know, but when you imagine all of those covered in guns...
The same thing that can make pretty pictures can do all sorts of other things on a battlefield, yeah. I
mean, more to the point, the way I was thinking about it, I live on a very remote farm, and you feel a bit of autonomy there. But it occurred to me that someone from head office in London, the party's central office, could just send a drone, and it could literally knock on our door and enforce whatever the hell it wanted with a gun pointed at us. And I know that's a bit extreme, but you have to think that the marginal cost of drones is now... I think I don't know whether you've seen any of those pretty harrowing videos from Russia and Ukraine.
Where they drop grenades on...
It's a little device that basically turns and drops a bomb, turns and drops a bomb. Right. And they are really very, very cheap already. The marginal cost of them will be almost nothing at some point, and it won't be one or two. They'll fly further, they'll do more damage, they'll have more technology on them, and this is just the beginning of it.
Now, you'd hope that those, ideally, the drones would be mostly destroying other drones. I mean, that would be the hope of how that escalates. But.
Well, that's the theory, but not according to YouTube or YouTube Shorts. It's mainly poor Russian soldiers sticking the finger up and then having their head blown off, as far as I can see. Yeah. I mean, it's harrowing. It's really disgusting. It's really harrowing, inhumane. It's everything I detest about the way people operate in the 21st century, which is literally not face to face. It's like, if I can do this, not face.
Dehumanizing.
It is. I mean, it's really, really despicable. I mean, I'd say that, there's an certain honor amongst fighting people if you're fighting hand to hand. Yeah. But this is now just out of control, and it won't be drones fighting drones. It'll be drones enforcing whoever's got the most drones.
If you think in terms of military. What would the ideal defensive versus offensive capabilities be? Ideally, you would have a much bigger advantage in terms of defense. I think that's already the case, that you need like 3 times the amount of offensive troops concentrated at any particular point right now in order to overcome a defender and one unit. So 3 to 1. I think that's roughly the ratio. I might be wrong, but it's certainly in that order. But ideally, ideally you would have that an even greater advantage, so that, well, whoever is the attacker, they're just wasting their resources. That would be the ideal military. I'm not sure how drones change that. Drones, they currently at least have a limited range. So if you're defender, you have a stationary thing, you do have an advantage there, and you can, I think, also have. I'm not an expert on that. I think just thinking intuitively, it seems like the defenders still have an advantage there. Would indicate that it's more conducive to peace, I would say.
Pass. I think I agree with you on the defensive. The energy input on a defensive position is less.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to move. Yeah. On the whole, you just hold your ground and fire.
Yeah.
I suppose the advantage of the incoming force is just. Well, no, not even. I'm thinking out of the cuff here.
The other thing that the drones, of course, do is the intel is a huge new thing. You have it's very cheap to get a very good picture of the front line, and that's for both sides. So every attack that comes in would be at it's much lower risk of surprise attack. So that seems also to the defender's advantage. As I say, I might be completely wrong on this, but that's, I think, the lens through which you would reasonably have to analyze the change in dynamics of who has the advantage there.
Well, China will win then, because they'll have the most drones. I mean, that's at the end of the day, it's who's got the most drones, I should imagine.
Maybe. The Ukrainians, I'm sure, have learned quite a bit about how to make drones by now.
But, they're still fighting a very old-fashioned war there in many ways. Trenches, people, it's unbelievable. We still do stuff like this, but we do, and
Yeah, that was a big switch in terms of thinking that I also noticed in Germany. It's, the naivete of the pre-Ukrainian-Russian war in terms of, right, Europe has been at peace for, 70 years by then? And this whole thinking about civis pacem para bellum, you need to be prepared for war if you want to have peace. That thinking, I don't know, was probably not present at all. And I'll be as guilty as anybody in those terms. But there's new thinking that you need to go through there. I don't know. I think I'm much more open to, as libertarians, we're generally open to self-defense and being prepared to defend yourself. So we're more ahead of the curve there. But yeah, I don't know. Drones. I don't know. I think we're the old approach to war in terms of, all right, we have military hardware that is incredibly expensive. That also gives me somewhat more hope that we're going to live in more free societies, because drones seem very much cheaper to produce than an F-22. And if that's the deciding factor, then I don't know. That seems like the hegemony of a very particular country would be. It's going to be disruptive. There's going to be more changeover. But I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know. I can't say either way.
We're going to have to wrap it on the head in a minute. My final question to you, I think, is going to be some kind of a prediction of the future, in particular, obviously, the future of the libertarian movement in Germany, since that's your place.
Yeah.
Realistically, where do you see the state of Germany in, say, 50 years' time? I mean, what are you planning for, at least?
The state of Germany in 50 years, 50 even. Can I say, let's say 10 years? I don't know.
No, I mean 10. Sure, I'm looking for the change. I suppose that's what I'm looking for. If it's 10 years, great.
It's so much of it is dependent on ideas. I mean, that's the thing that Mises always emphasized, is that ideas are lead to action, and the question is, can ideas change? If I think of it just in terms of interests, all right, people following their short-term interests and without an ability to look into the long term, I'd say that doesn't bode too well. I mean, I could paint a picture which is reasonable. I wouldn't say it's bleak. The advantage is that we are somewhat, we have a good degree of wealth, and that nobody will have to starve. All right. And if there are lots of headwinds in terms of demographics, and industrial bases is in decline, and the social safety nets are quite expansive and unsustainable with the increasing load and the decreasing ability to carry the load. I could paint a very reasonable picture. I mean, nobody would have to starve. You wouldn't get exactly what you wanted. People who stay in Germany would have a good life and be able to build a future for themselves and their families. It just wouldn't be as good as it could be if you were to go along a libertarian path. But if they look too short-sighted, then it's the Argentinian path, right? If they say, okay, nobody who has had benefits promised to them by politicians over decades, nobody's willing to budge an inch on those. Well, then that means that the future for people who do want to stay there is much more in jeopardy. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that goes further and further into decline. So, I mean, you can implement the Argentinian thing, what Milei is trying to do at any point in time. It's all right. You short-term pain, long-term gain. That's the basic thing that's on offer. If you are willing to take a little bit of a setback in terms of benefits for I don't know, just a few years, and I mean the government sector has to be scaled down to a large extent, which doesn't mean that people are going to starve. It means that people, instead of being engaged in a bureaucracy, are engaged in productive activity. That doesn't mean, I mean, just because you lose your job there, doesn't mean that you don't have time and human capital to do something else. So if you were willing to go through that phase, Germany could be an absolute powerhouse. My prediction, probably you're going to go the middle ground. Probably they're not going to go as bad as Argentina, and probably they're not going to go the way of, having a bright future for Germany. They're just going to go the middle of the road, and that's my prediction.
Well, obviously, I wish you all the best with the Libertarian Party. Not that I'm, like I say, I'm at all political, but if I was, I think I'd be a libertarian. So good luck with that. And many thanks for coming in, sharing your words of wisdom. I've enjoyed talking to you, and good luck.
Thanks, Tim. Bye.